In hour 12, I was determined to get it right. I knew all the areas I had to improve: altitude to manage airspeed, trim, thinking ahead of the aircraft, lookouts, BUMFISH, heading, round out, radio calls. I spent much of the week running the circuits in my head and on the chair memorizing the procedure. In hour 12, I was going to test this preparation. Also, I have footage of the entire flight from both GoPros for the first time. The weather this morning was similar to last week's hour 10 flight. It was only a little colder with a lower QNH. ATIS responded this.
Camden, terminal information Alpha, runway 06, wind variable 5 knots, skyhill tail wind 3 knots, visibility greater than 10 kilometres, showers in area, nil significant cloud, temperature 20, QNH 1010, first contact with Camden Tower or ground, notify us information Alpha.
Apart from a few showers in the area, the conditions were almost ideal for circuit training. I was excited to test the skills I had practiced at my desk, and more about this in a moment. My previous circuit flights showed a pattern of problems with my plane handling. The same issues repeated. I tended to be late in the controls. My BUMFISH check was sluggish. Radio calls froze my brain, etc. I realized that practicing all these items in the cockpit while flying the plane in a circuit would not work. The cockpit environment during flight is very fluid, stressful, and incompatible with how I learn. So I decided to take a different approach. I brought the cockpit to my workbench. I printed out the dashboard of the Cessna 172 from my X-Plane 12 simulator and placed it in front of me on the desk. You can see me training with the paper cockpit in this photo. I sat for a few minutes and played a complete circuit in my mind. I would start with a radio call at holding point Alpha and take off. I imagined the instruments operating, handling the yoke, thrust and flaps, and calling out loud the radio calls for a touch and go and full stop. I would continue the imaginary flight for a touch and go and then repeat. After a few times, I could run through the paces with little hesitation. I also did a lot of BUMFISH checks and radio calls while waiting at traffic lights on the long drive to Camden. I'll continue using my desk flight training as a suitable learning method. It's even better than doing circuits in the simulator because it allows me to focus on the process, not the simulated flying. Another thing I tried was to convert the BUMFISH checklist into a flow. I reasoned that what really matters in BUMFISH is ensuring that all the checks are done. The order shouldn't matter. I wanted to devise a way to do the tests reliably and decided that a pre-landing checklist in the form of a flow was a good idea. A flow check in aviation refers to a systematic review of cockpit instruments, controls, and systems to ensure that they are set correctly for a specific phase of flight. The aim is to verify that all settings are as they should be for optimal performance and safety. While a flow check is a quick routine scan, it's often followed by a more detailed checklist to confirm that nothing was missed. You can see my flow in this picture here. With flows, you have to remember a motion, not an acronym. In this case, I'd start by looking at the undercarriage through the left window, continue with the brakes on the rudder pedals, and then working my way up, right and down the dashboard. Motion is easier to remember than letters, at least in my case. Before spending too much time learning BUMFISH in a flow, as I call it, I checked with Greg to see if having a custom version of this checklist is okay. And while I think it's okay, the examiner might have a different opinion. Unfortunately, examiners do have a different opinion to my own. In aviation, standards are critical, so my custom BUMFISH in a flow checklist was not approved. I was confident I could complete the circuits correctly after spending so much time desk flying the days before. I emphasize correctly, not perfectly. For example, I could remember and execute the BUMFISH checklist radio calls, retain RPMs, airspeeds, flaps, altitudes, and landmarks, and use all that correctly in the circuit. This doesn't mean that my circuits won't be wide or at the wrong altitude, but there's no use trying to get a perfect circuit if I can't remember and execute the pre-landing checklist or I'm consistently overshooting the circuit altitude. In my pre-flight briefing with Greg, I explained my preparation and that I'd like to test myself. So I asked Greg not to prompt me. I wanted to imagine that I was flying alone, and of course Greg agreed. Another item on my to improve list was landings and go-arounds. If you remember, I landed terribly in our 11's last circuit. It should have been a go-around. The issue was that I had already consumed half of the runway trying to stabilize the plane to land. This was a clear go-around, and I was upset with myself and promised to land only if the approach was stable and I had the runway ahead. I discussed last week's terrible landing with Greg and said I would go around without prompting if I'm not happy with the approach. We also had a chat about BUMFISH and flows. There was a new version of the circuit standard. The new standard requires reducing RPMs to 1800 once reaching the threshold downwind and then 1500 before turning base. With all that in mind, we got in the plane, did all the checks and lined up at holding point alpha. Once again, I called tower for takeoff clearance and reported my position as holding point 06 instead of holding point alpha.
Camden Tower, Julia Bravo Charlie at holding point 6, ready to take off for 4 circuits.
Julia Bravo Charlie, hold position.
Holding position, Julia Bravo Charlie.
Rami Whiskey, clear touch and go.
Clear touch and go, Rami.
Alright, so just remember it's holding point alpha.
What did I say?
You said holding point 6.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so
Can make this
always look at the sign if in doubt. Holding point alpha. If you're at holding point alpha, by definition, you're at runway 06.
Yeah. How many times can I make the same mistake? This will be the last one. Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, never say last. No, seriously, this is the last one.
I'll put that back to 1,000. So a good idea when we start entering the runway, we just check fuel's on, mixture is rich, switches are on.
Yeah. I wanted to do the flow check that David showed me, but I haven't practiced it yet, so
yep.
I'll do it another time.
Sure, Bravo Charlie, follow the Citabria, just airborne, cleared for takeoff.
Cleared to take off, Julia Bravo Charlie. Okay.
Alright, so what have you forgotten?
Alright, so, forgotten? Oh yeah, lane. There's going to be mix, is rich, fuel is both going to go on the center line.
When you would have found out as soon as you put the full power on, that would have coughed away.
Yeah.
Alright, let's go.
Alright, full throttle.
Heels on the floor.
Heels on the floor. Got a airspeed is alive, everything is in the green, please and phase in the greens. Reaching 60 knots now and rotate. I've got 74 knots. It's gone over now. Okay, 74 knots. Got the good heading. Trim 1, 2, yeah, about there.
Takeoff, crosswind, downwind, radio calls, BUMFISH, flaps, RPM, etc. were all decent in Circuit 1. I kept speed, altitude and heading better than ever before. On final, I ended up high, and as I promised, I didn't land. Instead, I did a go around, and that felt good. I could see that I was too high and chose not to attempt to correct a bad situation. The go around was the best option by far. So we were off for Circuit 2. In Circuit 2, crosswind, downwind and base were decent again. I did the radio call, BUMFISH and managed airspeed and altitudes well using power and altitude. My turn to final was wide and I ended up on the right side of the runway, so I continued the turn to intercept the runway and then line up. There was plenty of space, so this was not a problem. The airspeed and altitude on the final were also good. I continued with the approach and landed with a big bounce. When I look at the video recording, I'm surprised how long that bounce was. Almost 2 seconds from the first touchdown to the second. Circuit 3 was again decent, similar to the previous circuits. Repeat, repeat and improve is the name of the game here. Significantly enhance the landing and round out so I can land on the main wheels first. And it worked. Landing 3 was by far the best. There was probably a tiny bounce, but it was a solid landing on the center line. Success. Landing 4 was a repeat of landing 3, and then landing 5 was a go around because we didn't receive clearance to touch and go from the tower. Landing 6 and 7 were okay, and 8, which was the last one, was excellent. I think my best, with barely any bounce and a much smaller thumping noise. This was a fantastic session, and I had made real progress for the first time. Greg's feedback and my paper dashboard practice are finally bearing results. Hour 12 was the first one where I felt that I controlled the plane. While I had to do a lot of work to make all my circuits identical, I finally had a solid base to work from within this session. I won't struggle to remember BUMFISH or control airspeed and altitude on the next flight. I'll be able to work on other things, especially spacing and improving the quality of the landing via better roundup so that the main wheels touch down first. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel right now. Just click on the subscribe button below this video. And of course, you can also head over to my detailed flight training log pages on the Tech Explorations website. In these pages, I document in detail all of my experiences and learnings from each one of my training flights. These logs contain a goldmine of information for any aviation student or anyone interested in aviation. Until next time, I wish you clear skies and safe landings.